Welcome everybody. This is the Pennsylvania Archaeological Council's first adventure into the Zoom world. And we are starting a series of 4 lectures this October, beginning with Dr. Carr's presentation on Dugout Canoes. Dr. Carr, Kurt, I've known him for 40 years now.
Yes.
So
we could be informal, Ira.
Yes, but he is in charge of the section of archaeology over at the State Museum and has been that for a number of years. Before that, he was at the State Historic Preservation Office. He's worked in the State Museum. He's gotten his degree from Catholic University, a PhD in 1992. He is basically in charge of, it says here, 10 million artifacts at the State Museum, I'm sure which 9 million are from PennDOT projects. So he has basically done everything from Paleo-Indian to colonial French and Indian war forts and everything in between. He says the studies are changing cultural adaptations amongst the Native American cultures in the Mid-Atlantic region, but essentially being the state archaeologist, he does everything. So without much further ado, Kurt, I'm gonna turn it over to you and let you inform us on Dugout Canoes.
Okay, and let me turn on my PowerPoint, which, there we go. Okay, inspired by Archaeology Month poster, my presentation will be on the State Museum Dugout Canoe Project. This presentation will provide general background on the dugouts recovered, on a few of the dugouts that were recovered in Pennsylvania, and it will describe the carving process for a modern replica, including an analysis of wear patterns on stone tools. As a definition, a dugout is simply a hollowed out log used as a watercraft. In my opinion, it is the oldest form of watercraft. I say this because Australia has always been separated from the mainland of Southeast Asia by 60 miles. No matter how low the sea levels got during the Pleistocene, it was always separated. It was occupied 45,000 years ago, and this is, humans only entered the area about 60,000 years ago, Southeast Asia about 60,000 years ago, and the only way for humans to get to Australia was by boat. And I think it took a while for archaeologists to realize this, but once they understood this as a fact, it became easier to postulate an early entrance into North America by boat below the glaciers, as you see in this diagram here. Although dugouts have been around for tens of thousands of years, wood decays quickly, and they are rarely found in archaeological deposits. The oldest that I have been able to find were in a bog in Germany that date to only 12,000 years ago. Pictured here, yes?
I'm sorry, you're gonna have to share your screen, I think.
Maybe people see it?
Okay, good, there you are.
Okay, well, you heard the introduction. Now we're talking about Birchbark Canoes. There we go. Everybody sees this? Ira?
Yes, you're good.
Okay, good. All right. Birchbark canoes illustrate the wide variety of uses, suggesting they were probably common in prehistory. However, birchbark canoes are more popularly associated with Native Americans, but they are only found in the Northeast and in the Great Lakes areas, where birch trees are sufficiently large to actually make the canoes. The rest of Eastern North America, they use dugout canoes. Some of the dugouts can be very elaborate, such as the Northwest Coast canoes that were painted and with carved clan symbols. And they were also ocean-going hunting vessels for whales, so quite elaborate. In the Mississippi Valley, The Spanish reported war canoes with 75 warriors that were 60 feet long. One of the largest canoes ever found that was recovered is the Cherokee Dugout. That is 32 feet long, and this was found in the Tennessee River, actually in the late 18th century. This was relatively low, relatively flat, and this type was poled rather than paddled. In Pennsylvania, dugouts were used to exploit food resources along lakes and streams and rivers, to move people, and to carry trade goods. As you can imagine, they were a very useful form of transportation. But they are frequently associated with the transitional period. I'm sure that they've been used throughout time, but it's hard to imagine the transitional period without dugouts to carry steatite, bowls, and also exotic stone materials such as jasper and Onondaga chert. Dugouts have been recovered from many states in the East, and they are found in many styles. The Lake Phelps dugout in North Carolina is large. It's 30 feet long, but it has a very simple design. Incredibly, it was found with a late woodland pot. I thought that was what an amazing piece of luck. One of the more spectacular finds was from the Noonan Lake in Florida. Here, 55 dugouts were uncovered along the downwind margins of the lake, probably being blown there by storms. They date as early as 5,000 BP. In fact, I think most of them date between 3 and 5,000 BP. And they're found in several different styles, with a platform bow, a blunt bow, a sloping bow, decks on the bow or stern, and internal supports and seats. The Curtis Pond Dugout is one of the more recent discoveries in Pennsylvania, and this was recovered by the crew of the Commonwealth Archaeology Program in 1996. This is a relatively simple design, and it's about 4.5 meters in length. However, this dugout illustrates a common problem with the recovery of archaeological specimens. The preservation and conservation of this specimen cost several $1,000s and took several years, actually. So this needs to be considered prior to taking dugouts out of water. Otherwise, you should just leave them in situ. They've been there probably for a long period of time, and unless they're going to be damaged, I think they should just stay there. Other dugouts from Pennsylvania include the Clifford Township dugout with a platform bow. This was being stored in a trailer, large trailer, where they thought they would keep the temperature controlled. And this is often a problem. A lot of dugouts across the state are in places like this. Some of them are in basements. The one from Hazleton is a low walled dugout. It was probably poled, but yeah, it was in a basement of the Historical Society, as I remember. Another dugout that I've seen, though, is the Lake Wallenpaupack dugout. And I know this image is terrible. It was behind glass, and the thing is 25 feet long, and to get a good picture, I took 3 pictures. The point is, this was a very heavy dugout. It had high walls to it. It had the seat carved into it, and actually it was washed out after Hurricane Hazel in 1955. At my urging, actually, both of these canoes, the Clifford Township canoe and the Lake Wallenpaupack canoe, were carbon-14 dated, especially the Wallenpaupack canoe. I thought that just looked a little more like it might be prehistoric in age. But in both cases, and in fact, in all cases, except for one, all the ones in Pennsylvania that have carbon-14 dated, they've all dated to historic times. The Mud Pond dugout, featured on the Archaeology Month poster, is the only dugout to be carbon-14 dated to prehistoric times at 1250 AD. This was recovered from a small lake in Luzerne County by 2 boys in 1936 and donated to the State Museum in 1968. It is on display on the 2nd floor in our archaeology gallery. As you can see, it was partially burned. It's my understanding that it was stored for a long time in a garage. The garage caught fire, and this is why you see this partially burned section of it here. We do not think that this was part of the construction of the construction process of the dugout. However, for a long time, nobody told me, or I was not aware of where the dugout, of where Mud Pond was. Turns out it's about 6 miles off of Route 81, just across the Luzerne County line. I visited the site, and actually a landowner adjacent to the place where the dugout was found, he has a labyrinth in his front or his backyard. And so when you go to view this lake, you walk through the labyrinth. I just thought that was an interesting adaptation. But anyway, beginning in the early 1990s, we carved 3 dugouts. The first was thin-walled, and while on the exhibit at the farm show, one of the walls broke out. The second one that you see here in the background burned in half during construction. These first 2 were mainly burned into shape rather than chipped or carved into shape. And because fire burns up, once you get a groove cut in the top of the dugout, you turn it over and let the fire do most of the work. However, obviously, you have to be very careful. And once the sides are to the dimension that's desired, you pack them with mud. The problem is that, especially with pines, softwoods, the knots in the pine really can catch fire actually behind the mud itself. And that's what happened to our second dugout. And actually it was the day before, actually, this is the morning of when the television crews were there, and we were going to sail it around City Island, and unfortunately it had burned in half, so we didn't do that. The third one that we made was a monster at 25 feet. It sailed in the Susquehanna Sojourn from Harrisburg to Chesapeake Bay, and there's quite a few people who remember going on that tour. It was rather spectacular. But this was very heavy. It's large. I think it would hold 8 people comfortably. The problem with this one is the walls were very thick, and eventually it dry rotted. And all of these, this one dry rotted, so we had to replace it. But all of these dugouts, the tools that were used were replica 18th century tools, metal tools. In 2005, the Commonwealth Archaeology Program, Fort Hunter Park, Allegheny National Forest, Mouchot State Forest, and a group of loyal volunteers created the dugout as an experiment in pre-contact technology. Our goal was to use methods only available to pre-contact peoples. As depicted in early drawings, this is the white drawing here, dugout construction was a process of burning and scraping. We were inspired actually by the axe and adze cache recovered on City Island. This was an incredible discovery from a late archaic context. It's essentially 8 stacked tools that seem to include both celts and grooved axes. Here they are here, and actually the one in the upper left was not part of the cache, but these are the 8 celts, and then there's the beginning of a grooved axe. Our main tool in carving the dugout, and we were going to carve more than we burned, at least that was the initial plan, were adzes, and 3 of the adzes, the 3 to the right, are made out of basalt. The one on the far left is made out of metal rhyolite. On the left, an adze blade is attached, in case you don't know what an adze is, attached horizontally to the handle. On the right, an axe blade is attached vertically to the handle. We experimented with several handle types and hafting techniques. Initially, we placed the adze in the fork of the branch, as you see here on the upper left of this slide. But it was amazing. They broke immediately. No matter how big the handle was, such as this brute right here, it broke the haft right away. And we learned to place the adze on the outside of the fork, and that prevented the breakage. And after that, with a minimal amount of work, we were able minimal amount of work on both the adze and also the hafting mechanism. These worked very well. A pine log, 20 feet long and nearly 3 feet in diameter, was donated by Mouchot State Forest. The process began by cutting the top third of the the log off and creating a groove down the middle that was widened and deepened by chopping and burning. Once the sides were burned to the correct width, they were covered with clay to prevent further burning. Each morning we started by covering the sides with mud to insulate them. Each day we burned 2 to 3 hours with the sides protected with wet clay. The adze removed the char along with the dry wood immediately below. The adzes worked very well, and I think we could have completed the carving with more chopping rather than burning. Burning is necessary at the end to dry out the wood, but I think we could have done most of the work by chopping rather than burning, which actually took a lot more time. We found that scraping using implements of wood or stone has worked just as well as the adze. That's with the charred material. They didn't cut the wood as well, but they could certainly scrape off the charred material. Did a lot of chopping. The adzes work very well. Again, this was a public display at Fort Hunter where we made this dugout in 2005, and literally we had thousands of people visiting us, and especially on weekends we had a lot of help, a lot of volunteers. But once the general shape is achieved, it is simply a matter of repeatedly mudding the sides, burning, and chopping the wood. Final polishing was done with a combination of wood ash and pine tar, and helped the interior become smooth enough to sit in. As you can imagine, with the chopping, there were just a lot of splinters, a lot of pieces of wood in there, and they had to be removed, and we did it with pieces of sandstone. We measured our progress on a daily basis. It required 17 days to carve the dugout, and actually we averaged less than an inch a day. Again, the fire burns up. It doesn't burn down very well. And we didn't want to flip this one over as we had done with the first two, because we didn't want to lose another dugout. So I think again, chopping would have done an effective job much more quickly. So our maiden voyage on the Susquehanna River from Fort Hunter to Sibley Island was on October 2nd, 2005, a little over 15 years ago. The river was very low. As you can see, it's low in the water. This is a very heavy dugout. It was low in the water, and it actually took 5 hours to travel about 5 miles. We didn't get into City Island until dark. It was I think we hit every rock. I was only there for the last hour, but I think we hit every rock of the Susquehanna River. People frequently ask if it is stable. Does it roll? Well, no, it doesn't. It is very thick. We left it thick. Again, we didn't want to have problems. We knew lots of people would be in and out of it. And yeah, we didn't want to have those kinds of problems. So we left it at least twice as thick on the sides and especially on the bottom than the historic examples that we have. But as you can see, it's very stable. The adze were made from Virginia greenstone basalt, and they took about 10 hours or more to grind into shape. Experimentation was required, as we discussed, to get the edge angle correct and to develop a functioning hafting technique. Examining the wear patterns on our stone tools, or these are some photographs of that, and they illustrate the damage on the adze after just actually 2 to 4 hours. You see these striations coming out. Heavily worn, this is a heavily worn basalt adze at the end of the project with significant striations. Although it really didn't reduce the adze much in size. You can see there's a chip out of it, a little break out of it, and it never required resharpening. This is another basalt adze at the end of the project, and again, you can clearly see the significant striations. And to be honest with you, the before picture is of this adze when it had a very different angle to the bit, and so it's not it's not a very good comparison. The metal rhyolite adze, rather than striations, it polished and it chipped, which I thought was kind of odd, since I think rhyolite is somewhat softer than basalt. The adze is not a common tool at archaeological sites. This is a classic plano convex adze that's in our collection. But there are certain time periods when adzes are more popular than others. For example, the Paleo-Indian Dalton adzes that are found along the lower Mississippi Valley. Um, the commonality of these artifacts is attributed to the making of dugout canoes, and that Paleo-Indians become much more mobile. These are late Paleo-Indian adzes or late Paleo-Indian artifacts, and they became a lot more mobile during the end of the Paleo-Indian period. The same is true for Lamoka adzes. They are common during the late Archaic, and this is an adaptation to the primeval forest. And so canoeing and moving around and exploiting a variety of resources is common for that time period. So we wanted to compare our adze collection. We don't have a lot of them. In fact, we only have 20 complete adzes. We wanted to compare our adzes, the wear patterns on our adzes to our experimental adzes. And this is one out of our collection. And you can clearly see the striations on here. So that kind of wear on a soft wood, chipping on a soft wood, is visible. And clearly this one was probably used for that purpose. However, the majority of the adzes that the experimental adzes that we the real adzes that we compared to our experimental adzes did not show that same kind of wear. In this case, it's hinge fracturing along this edge, very unlike the experimental versions. However, quite frankly, this was a very simplistic experiment. Several of the adzes in our collection were not made out of basalt, so there's a different lithic material type. And after using an adze for a while, you can do all kinds of things with an adze. And we were working softwood, maybe other adzes were used for working hardwood. I think we need to do more experiments with different material types and different lithic types to make this a better experiment to get an idea of what materials and what activities will create these wear patterns. So in conclusion, the Dugout project was a real learning experience on the use of stone tools and carving a dugout canoe. There were just lots of things that we learned, or that I learned at least, about this process. The other aspect of it, of the dugout canoe, and this is really not surprising, but making the dugout and putting it on display is a great public outreach vehicle, no matter what your topic might be. It is a kid magnet. While the kids are seated in the dugout, and they love that process, we can talk to the parents about archaeology in Pennsylvania and visiting the State Museum. So they are a lot of work. And then you have to store these things and take care of them. But if you're doing a lot of public outreach, this is something you might want to consider. Don't make one that's 20 feet long, though. 15, 12, that's a much better size, much more manageable size. So I would like to thank Fort Hunter County Park. They're just wonderful hosts for us. Rick Candair of Allegheny National Forest, he was one of the people that participated in the process of making a dugout. He also wrote his master's thesis on dugout canoes in Eastern North America. Mouchot State Forest provided the log. They provided us with a lot of materials for several of our experiments. And of course, our loyal volunteers, without whom we could not have completed this project. So on that note, I finished my presentation. I guess if we have any questions, Ira.
Yes. We're going to, okay. Actually, we're going to open this up for any questions that anybody wants to have at this time. We'll keep the chat room open for about 5 minutes. And if you'll post your questions on the chat function, I'll go through them, filter them, and feed them off to Kurt. So we have this beautiful sunset here, but I'm going to put one on myself actually. If I can find it.
Now, Ira, is this presentation going to be available online someplace afterwards?
That's really a good question. And we have it recorded, and I think the idea is that we are going to be able to put this on in some public way. So we'll have to see how we're going to be able to do that. All right, here we go. That's what I want. Speaking of, there we are. Okay. That was also at the farm show, and this is, of course, our Nittany lion at Penn State. So here's the first question then, Kurt. What are some of the common conditions where dugout canoes have been found in Pennsylvania? I guess the question is, where do you find them?
In the lakes or the Poconos. I think we have a dozen or so dugouts that have been found, recorded in Pennsylvania, and all of them come from the Poconos that I know of. And they're all found in these lakes. And actually, Joe Baker wrote up a report on the Curtis Pond Dugout. And at that time, he did a survey of other dugouts that were known, most of which were not published, but he found those. And again, they were mostly historic. He thinks that these dugouts were used as part of, they were used by trappers, probably early in the, contact period. And that every dugout, every lake probably had its own dugout. You don't take dugouts out of the water. If you take them out, they dry and they crack. And that's one of the problems that we have with ours. So you would have left them in water. And actually there's examples in both North Carolina and also in Massachusetts where they actually filled the dugout with rocks so it would sink in the water and it would be below the freeze line. We find them in lakes. That's where they're easily preserved. That's where there was, as I said, there was probably one in every lake. And you don't find them too often in streams or rivers. They just get washed away. And then they stay, close to the surface in some form, and they decay very quickly.
Okay, so here's another question. I feel like we're back at the farm show in a way. What do you make a dugout out of? What's the preferred?
It's really interesting because you make them in Pennsylvania. They're all made. The majority are made out of white pine. There might be one made out of sycamore. That seems unlikely to me, but I've heard that there's a sycamore one out there. When you move further south, they're made out of actually in Florida, those 55 are all made out of bald cypress. I'm not even sure what a bald cypress tree is. But it seems each region had their own wood type that they used to make their dugouts from. In the Mississippi Valley, they also were all made out of one wood, and now it slips my mind. But it's a soft hardwood that grows relatively straight along waterways, not sycamore though. So yes, each region had its special wood.
Okay, so here's another set of questions here. To clarify on the chronology, clearly there's mention of several dugout canoes that are of the historic period, but do you find, what would your assessment be as to what time periods you would find dugout canoes, or when would they be used?
I think dugout canoes have been used for 45,000 years at least, and probably much older than that. And I think Paleo-Indian people are the first people who entered North America, got here by some kind of watercraft, but probably out in the ocean. So I think they've been around for a long time. The canoes that I know of that have been found, I mean, the oldest canoe in North America, I think is only about 6,000 years old. And again, Rick Candair in his master's thesis, which actually he just published that someplace. So there's an updated version of it, 2010 or so, that probably includes that information. But they're amazingly not that old when we find them. They're just actually a very rare thing. That example in Noonan's Lake in Florida, where they found 55 of them and then dated them all. That is, probably more than the rest of the Mississippi Valley.
So basically, what you're saying is it's largely a matter of preservation rather than use.
I think so, yes. And I think, all right, you're going to find them in lakes and ponds where they can be, covered up with mud. You're not going to find them in streams and rivers because they get washed away. Although the Wallenpaupack dugout was found in a stream. The stream was controlled by the dam that they have at Wallenpaupack, but it was found in a stream, an old stream bed.
Okay, here's another question here. For the tools that Native Americans would have used to make these dugouts, where did they get that basalt and rhyolite from?
Well, the rhyolite would come from South Mountain. That's where we got our rhyolite. Actually, the basalt, there's a basalt source in York County. I think it's the Rossville basalt that has been used or has been identified for axes, grooved axes. So they could have used that. We got our basalt from Virginia. But you want something dense and hard. And basalt will do that.
Okay, here's another one, and of course it's from an archaeologist. But in the comparison between the experimental and the prehistoric adze, that slide that was further back, what was the material that the prehistoric adze was made out of?
I think it was some kind of meta sandstone. The one that we looked at, the hinge fracturing. In my mind, it couldn't have been a quartzite. It sort of looked like a quartzite. I remember the piece. A quartzite would be extremely hard to shape. But yeah, that's all I can say about that. Okay,
and I guess one final question here. Do you have other resources or literature that you could point people to on dugouts, and especially in the Ohio Valley?
Rick Candare's master's thesis really is the main one that I know of off the top of my head. And the only publication that we've done is a pamphlet on the Dugout project. That's, I can mail it to you. It was published in Heritage Magazine. So it's you can get a reprint from Heritage Magazine.
Okay, all right. So what I'm going to say is that we're going to make an attempt to associate, if we do in fact get this presentation up on the web as a video, we will try to provide a link to both the pamphlet and a link to a way to possibly get Rich Candare's thesis. So
okay.
Now the chat room, Hannah's been doing good advertising and good commercial announcements. First, though, I thank you, Kurt, for doing this presentation.
Well, thank you for everybody who showed up.